We're Type Electives. Thank you all for joining us today. We're an online school shaping the future of type, co-founded by my co-director Lin Yun and myself, Juan Villanueva. We offer classes that go beyond traditional type design education, exploring lettering, type design, and creative technology. And we love working with faculty that bring respect, responsibility, criticality, and love to their practice. And obviously, we love working with students who also value those principles. Um, so today we are on the third of our fall lecture series when we invite new and established voices to share their stories, knowledges, and ideas with our community. And this season we're exploring the importance of language support, diacritic design, language revitalization, everything in the context of typeface design. These are the amazing people we're working with this year, and they're going to be in the lecture series. We've heard from some of them already, and if you want to watch the videos, you can check out our website. So whether you're an academic or aspiring type designer or just curious about the intersection of language and technology and how that intersects with identity and culture, this lecture series is for you. So here's what we've covered so far. Cultivating multilingual typographic diversity, the Cherokee syllabary, and today we're going to be doing this very special talk about African type and type design. And we have two more coming up in the upcoming week, so please stay tuned, check it out. And just remember that we have a Q&A section. You can put your questions there or in the chat. We'll be monitoring both. And as usual, our goal is to really share resources, insights, and spark dialogue for our community. And all the talks are recorded, so you can catch it after the talk finishes. We'll try to upload it by next week. And please do check it out on our YouTube channel and also share with people, your students or friends who might find this really interesting and useful. So quickly shouting out to two of our new classes. We have a class on drawing letters for New York City based in the New York Signage Museum. This is a very amazing workshop where you get to explore the museum itself, you get to see the archive, and you also get to draw letter forms, learn lettering, and learn a little bit of type design, all with hands-on experience. For this class, we also have a pay what you can, so you can sign up or just fill out the form and tell us how much you can afford to pay, and we'll try our best to make sure we can give everyone a spot. We also have a new class on experimental type design, and this is very interesting because exploring new techniques from our instructor, Kel Troughton, graffiti, sign painting, lettering, and type design all together to get you to the next level when it comes to exploring ideas in lettering and type design. And we also have a pay what you can form for this as well. And before we dive in, these are some simple ways that you can support us. You can donate to our scholarship fund. We really appreciate that. That goes to help with covering a lot of the tuition and a lot of the scholarships that we offer. You can also subscribe to our newsletter where you can learn about our classes and upcoming events. Follow us on social media and support us on YouTube and spread the words about our classes and events and mission to your friends and colleagues so that we can continue growing our community. Every little bit helps to help programs like this running and help us keep design education accessible. And with that out of the way, I want to pass the mic along to Lynn to get us started with today's event.
Thank you so much. We are super duper excited, and I'm sure all of you are too, to have Chisaokwu on the stage with us today. Chisaokwu Joboson is a Nigerian type and brand designer passionate about reflecting African culture and telling African stories through letter forms. He's the founder of Ụdị Foundry, an independent type foundry that creates expressive and culturally rooted typefaces. His work explores how typography can embody African languages, scripts, and visual traditions while challenging the dominance of Western narratives in design. He has spoken at international design events, including ATypI, and is an advocate for growing type education and access in Africa. Through his practice, Chisaokwu aims to expand the creative possibilities of African typography and inspire the next generation of designers. And as you're listening through Chisaukwu's talk, please keep in mind that you can add your Q&A to the questions panel in Zoom, or you can put your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer all your questions. So please keep that in mind. And with that, please welcome Chisaokwu to the stage.
Hi, Lynn. Hi. Hi, everyone. I think Lynn and Juan were kind of humble enough not to mention the fact that I'm a two-time student of type electives. So it's quite beautiful. I'm returning as a lecturer of some sort. So yeah, thanks for this opportunity and invitation. I would now share my screen so we can begin the talk. I hope you all can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see it, but it's not in full screen yet.
Okay. So let me get to play it.
Perfect.
All right. So again, hi to everyone who's tuning in. Yeah, basically my talk is on type design for African languages. And I would begin by introducing myself. Yeah, my name is Chisaokwu, but you can call me Chisa. I mean, if you get to pronounce the full name, you score extra points. I'm from Enugu, the eastern side of Nigeria, or eastern part of Nigeria. I actually have a background in civil engineering, but sadly, I do not practice. Self-taught designer who has a bit of intersection, who's practiced an intersection between brand and type design. So that's me at the top. I felt like brand and type designer wouldn't be a good, name to put, but I'm like, yeah, let me go way beyond. But yeah, I do brand and type design, and I've been doing this for over 7 years, I would say. A kwan, quick disclaimer, and this is a bit of an inside joke, so if you don't get it, you don't get it. I'm sorry, I can't explain it. But it's important to state that I am not an authoritarian of African typography of, any sort. So my experiences, what I would get to share, it's more of like my lived experience entering type design and not like an authority of how, African type design should be. I'm just another passionate African lending the voice on African type. And for most part, as much as, I've had a lot of people who've come before me and speak on this particular topic. And obviously, there's the hope that there will be more to come after me. I feel like the goal is that we can reclaim African typography and make it inclusive, when it comes to the global conversation on type design. I would start off by speaking on my journey on how I got into type design. Initially, I would design because I started off with brand. So I would design logos for African brands per se. And there was always this particular thing I would notice where, you do a nice logo and perhaps you want to do a logo type and, you have to kind of tweak, say, a certain Eurocentric kind of font to fit into, obviously, the logo type. There's also a problem where in designing, it gets to the point where, oh, you want to, say, pair a typography or a font, and either the font really does not feel African, or there's a case where you can't find certain characters or certain letter forms of a certain language which you can use to communicate in that font. And I thought that was kind of a problem. I felt like, there was a bit, so much neglect, to be honest, and I thought there were a lot of roadblocks. For one, I felt like most fonts claimed, they will claim it's global, but they never really supported African languages. It would be interesting to note that only 5% of the world fonts actually support African languages, and that is a very small, percentage when it comes to, having so much fonts in the world. Also, another roadblock I would face is that, typeface for, your Afrocentric use weren't many. Until recently, but it's still a case where, you want to create something really Afrocentric. You don't want to cater to the Western, trends or way of designing, but you couldn't find that kind of font that would really, hit the mark. The third would be the fact that, African typography was not being created by Africans, and this is not to take away the good works of good and meaningful individuals who have tried to cater for African typography who are not Africans, but there was also a problem somehow where I would feel that there was a need for more Africans to actually be the ones creating for the language. And so in 2023, I decided to start a certain type design practice called Ụdị Foundry. And basically, it's one where we create, and when I say we, it's me. I'm sorry for now. But, it's one where I'm trying to redefine, having to create or having to speak on what African typography can be like in today's world, the contemporary world in general, where I'm trying to kind of reflect African culture, trying to represent African languages and also involve, the underdeserving scripts which we have in this continent. I spoke about my journey in length in an article I wrote on Medium. So, and this is one of my earliest exploration on type design, basically. So, one thing I've come to realizing, I've been doing type for 2 years now, but one thing I've come to kind of discover is that, the work of type design for African language has many pathways, and it's quite interesting and also valid too, given that for most parts, Africa is a very diverse continent. The second largest, over 8 million people, 800 million people, and also over 800 ethnic groups. So you can tell that there would be so much diversity, and so you cannot have that one fit all for type design per se. And so I would be going through the process or the different pathways I've come to discover during my journey so far. And one would be the fact of, or the pathway of accessibility through Latin extended. So, to begin with, Africa went through colonization, and as it stands, 90% of the continent speak or use Latin scripts. So it is just very important that, as we can't change the hands of time, but obviously we are the present day and age. So you have to, or there's no say the colonization of the script immediately. So it's a question of like, okay, now we use Latin script. How do we cater for that? How do we find ways we can use the Latin script in the various language we own? And yes, 90%, there's also the problem, like I said, which 5% of the world fonts always have like cater for African languages. So for this, I would put a case study of this particular typeface of mine, which I call mechanical display. And well, mechanical is a monospace font. I feel you should just ignore the gibberish because that was all ChatGPT. In my head, I just wanted to create a font that felt like, it was monospaced. It kind of Eurocentric, but also having, the Latin characters that support African languages. That was just it. So
what is your gender?
Yeah.
My gender. I'm a mechanic.
So this is a way the whole name came to be, having to, instead of, because there was a thing with like, oh, Africa, it should be a C or a K, and in a way I feel like it would be a K, but we cannot actually, fight back given that they say a C is pronounced like a K, and that's fine. So I got this was kind of the inspiration at that time. I also found this meme and it was really nice. I personally feel it should have been Meowcanic. I feel like the guy, whoever did this meme kind of missed that opportunity, but it's all good. And yeah, this was the outcome basically, I'm gonna kind of having this, grit feel per se. And for most parts, it's always a thing where, oh, someone is learning type and you start with the basic Latin character sets, and for most parts, everyone stops there, and it's not a question like, oh, if you really want to be inclusive, how far can you go with that? And so I went as far as like going through the Latin, extended Latin, which kind of caters for different languages in Africa. Here you see like the Ani, words of the Ani, you see the Bambara, you see the Igbo, you see the Fula, used by the Fulanese, you see the Sera, you see the Yoruba. So it's like, oh, okay, you can have a font that feels Eurocentric, but has those characters you feel should be in an actual font. Yeah, and this was a bit of some promotionals for it. There's an Igbo saying, which means I love you, basically. So yeah, the second pathway, I would say, would be the Afrocentric approach to type. And this one is really special to me because, for one, it's kind of was the pathway one of the pathways I got into type from, because initially my explorations were about creating, typeface that felt African, that someone could look at it and say, oh, yeah, this gives off this particular vibe, and that was very important for me. So a case study for me would be Ojuju, which was basically my first produced font. And Ojuju is a reverse contrast variable typeface, which kind of draws inspiration from African masquerades. So, if you are African, you would have a certain experience with, oh, this cultural masquerade of a thing where, during events, during festivals, there's one strange being, very eccentric, that kind of displays, dances, has a spiritual kind of tone to the nature of the event per se. Also a folk tale to it. And yeah, these were my inspirations starting out. These are basically African masquerades. And for one, I got a very good reference from this particular poster of a film by Osman Sembene called Mandabi. And when I saw it, it kind of spoke to me the first instance. I was like, yeah, this is crude. It's like the letters are looking at you in a mean manner. It felt like it wasn't really conforming to a standard of like having to design type, and anyway, Western type. And I was like, yeah, this would work, And so this is exploration, basically, having to go from thin to be it extra bold or black. Then this is also like how, so for this, I wanted like certain characters to feel like it was trying to dance or trying to express itself, just like the masquerade would do. So the Ojuju, the name comes from a very common word used to call masquerades in Nigeria, which is Ojuju. And yeah, this was the outcome basically. Yeah, so it's the progression is one where at every point, because due to the diversity of the culture of masquerades, you would find various forms, all sizes, all weights. And it's now the question of like, how can you kind of represent them in the typeface, that caters for everyone, be it thin, fat masquerade, all that. Yeah, and this were certain like points where I really wanted the typeface to feel like it was moving, dancing. And again, I'm very big on representing like or designing for African languages. I would always want my fonts to like look good on, different African words, because I mean that is why I design. Yeah, this is a promotion on it. The third is one I am like diving into. I currently dived into, and it has been a huge learning curve because ideally I grew up on English, and even though I speak Igbo, it's one where, representing or designing for that kind of language is more of you doing the Latin extended. So it's, then I would design, I would design for Latin extended, and it will feel like, oh, yeah, the job is done. Come on, take your award, celebrate, but then you now realize you have, Tiffany, you have like Adlam, you have Insibidi, you have a lot of other underrepresented African scripts which don't use Latin, basically, So it's a question of like, oh, are you really done with the job? Is the job done or is it final? So for this, I would put a case study of a typeface I did. I think I released this year, Oja Display. And basically it's bold, expressive. It's inspired by the anatomical structure of the traditional Oja flute from Eastern Nigeria. And this is how the flute looks like. This is how my flute looks like. Yeah. So I thought of how I could, take this element or this instrument and, look at the structure and make it into a font, And this was most of the sketch, So it's like, oh, there are tapered corners, a bit of roundiness, all that to also, heavy. And yeah, these were certain explorations on the A and a bit of like the process. And this was the outcome. And for a while, I was really happy with it. It had Latin extended. It looked good on certain, materials per se. A side note, because I just realized I put jollof was. I feel like everyone in this world before I should have this like before I leave this world, I should just test jollof, and um, respect to my African brothers, I just feel like Nigerian jollof is the best. So yes, moving on. So I had the Oja display basic Latin, and also the Latin extended. So it's a question of like, oh, how can you replicate this in certain scripts? This is Tiffany. And this is how it looks. For most parts, because I would go to different fonts and kind of try and find if they have a style for Tiffany, and they didn't. I feel like this is, I don't know, I feel probably there's no total sense, so it kind of replicates all through the internet, like this is how it would be. So I'm like, okay, why not create an Oja display Tiffany, and it kind of looked good. And I was like, oh, perhaps I can push it more. This is the Atlam. And like, how can we push this to have, say, an Oja display Atlam? And it now opens the door to the fact that there is a huge need for, us to kind of cater for underrepresented scripts within our own fonts per se. The question moving forward is, who drives African type? And for what I have come to see, especially with African typography, it's culture. Typography is not just like a shared human craft per se, which can be easily done. It carries, for African typography, there's a bit of like culture to it. It's like a way of life, that people use to hold themselves or, identify themselves or whatnot. And I feel like, well, technically anyone can teach or even design for African languages, but the how matters as much as the who, and I feel like it's very important we honor the craft. We also pay homage to the fact that, oh, say you want to design a type, it's yes, good and fine, but it has to have a need for deep research, collaboration, and also, a thing where you are not just designing to say make money, but also designing to cater for the great needs of a certain people. And, I feel it's very important for the West to be collaborators and not dictators. It's been ongoing for a long time, where you see it, and I feel like it's quite sad, as much as it's beautiful that there's been a lot of progress so far, but I feel like it's very important that the West does not kind of dictate how African typography should be. It should be the people dictating, while everyone goes in line with what we say it should be. Challenges on the road, call them speed limits. Now, I would say it feels, that the road of global type kind of just closes up on Africans, because I know how it was getting into type design. I'm grateful for platforms like Type, Elective, who kind of cater to cater to Africans, bilingual and whatnot. But it's also a need for more platforms of that sort to help to, introduce Africans to type design. For most part, it's very expensive. It's almost inaccessible to a lot of people who live in this continent due to how expensive it is. And it feels like, in a way, it's a deliberate action so that, the West keeps doing what they do, having to create for people like us. I feel like it's very important that we need to clear the barriers so that we can make type design accessible to Africans. And that is why I kind of I'm looking towards creating a community that can teach type and make it very, very accessible. I call it Type Africa. It's still a budding community, but that's the aim, that they can be a home for people in Africa, especially Africans, to learn type design, and then we can now start to shape what African type can be like. Looking forward now, we talk about like what the future of type design in Africa can be like. And I feel like, African type design per se, it's a combination of like different voices due to how, diverse it is. It's not a one fit all. It's not like, oh, this is how it should be, Luckily and thankfully, Latin script is not the only thing or the only scripts we use. So you see that we need to kind of meet everyone at their own place, and not just assume that, oh, let's all use this and, everyone will be fine. I feel like Africans should be at the front line of type for African languages. There's no negotiable for this. And I feel like the future of African type is not like in years to come, is not, in the future ahead per se. It's in now, this very moment. Yes, and that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Aside from, I mean, the visuals are so good. And thank you so much for, being so thoughtful and like I just feel like a lot of like authenticity like coming through like your lecture and your voice and everything. So thank you so much. I think I guess I think there's a lot of questions. I think perhaps like we should get a head start on these questions because I think there's so many.
With the Q&A and then we'll chime in.
Yeah. So folks who are listening in, you can pop in questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. The first question is, I think, one that a lot of people would be curious about. How can an African type designer use our own reference and sort of reduce all of their experiences and references into a typeface that resonates with Africans?
Yeah, that's a nice question. And I get that could be a difficult thing given, as much as we as Africans have like certain shared experience, there's a lot of diversity, and there's always the question of like, if I'm creating something for, say, with my lived experience, would someone from South Africa kind of like resonate with it, with someone from Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, all that. I feel like it really doesn't matter. I feel like at the end, the diversity is much welcome because it kind of creates, it kind of puts us at a point where, it caters to everyone in some way, so that I can create from my own lived experience. Someone from South Africa can create a typeface that kind of, it's still that African side. There's always going to be the African factor, regardless, because at some point we can actually see something, though you cannot explain it. You can see something and say, yeah, this is actually African, So yeah, that's how I feel it should be. You just kind of create from your own, environment, what you're familiar with, and definitely it would reflect to someone who might not even share those, backgrounds or environments with you, but is African.
Thank you so much, Zay. That's a great answer. The next question we have is to have better acceptance of African languages into the type world. Wouldn't the Unicode Consortium need to recognize and develop scripts for keyboards for those languages? There's a big question that I'm curious about your take on that.
Yeah, definitely. The good thing is that there's ongoing work towards that effect. Yeah, and I feel like it's very urgent that it's now a thing that should be considered, to be honest. But regardless, I feel like, I feel like we can create and wait for that moment. So when that moment comes, it's not a case where we now have to, oh, okay, Unicode has actually kind of supported the language. So let's start creating, just be ready. I feel like it's just necessary. If, there's an underrepresented an endangered script that needs to, and, in having to kind of create or cater for those scripts, basically using design, they can be a certain urgency when there's a lot of people are creating for this script, so why isn't the script in Unicode? That's now the big question. Than, oh, well, nobody's designing for it. It seems like nobody wants to use it. So I feel like, yeah, we should just come prepared.
Totally. I totally agree with that. You can't let that stop you from designing. It makes it more challenging, of course, but I support that point. That's awesome. The next question, similar vibe, but this one is more of a personal anecdote. This person is sharing that they were told by a major player in the design world during a type conference a few years back, but it's still true. But is it still true that most major type houses don't design for Africa due to the fact that it's not economically viable for them?
Yeah, I guess I've heard the argument before. And I mean, for the most part, we are not just designing for capitalism per se. It's more of like we're trying to preserve culture, which supersedes everything else. So I feel like if we keep thinking about what would give us, like, money and versus what would not, then in all honesty, we are not truly designing for an inclusive, world of type design or typography. So yeah, it's a question of, like, I don't know. It's just that question of, does it really matter for you to design for the money versus, like, oh, you want to actually include, you know, um, you want to include, like, people who matter too, because everyone matters in the entire, like, conversation of type design, every language. So yeah, we need to get to a point where, like, it's not the case where, oh, you're not catering for this and you're not catering for that because, oh, you want to make so much money. That's how I feel though.
Yeah, 100%. Don't just design for capitalism. Design to preserve culture, and I think being part of that culture makes it more urgent
Yeah.
to have typefaces in your language that speak to you, as opposed to from people that are not part of that culture. Maybe they don't see they don't see the importance as much. So that's why we need more people like you practicing typeface design and sharing that knowledge. Thank you, Chisa.
And I would also like add, like, even if like, like even if you yourself are not a type designer, like if you want these things and just like saying these things can often make it come true just by, like sheer popularity of opinion, right? It might like prompt someone who like was like dabbling in like type to be like, wait, like my friends, like my community, like want something like this. Why don't I spend like a weekend like messing around, right? Like so there's so many different ways where if you want something to happen, I think it's very important, like for us as a community to sort of like rally around it, because like at the end, we're all just inspiring each other to make something. And that's how everything starts.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and one other thing, perhaps just to piggyback on that, is like support, people working in this area. I like the analogy of going to a zine fair and buying a little publication by an independent designer. For you, maybe that amount of money is it's not much, but for the person who's creating it, it really encourages them to continue designing, continue putting material out. So as much as you can support, independent foundries, smaller people who are starting out. And yeah, it encourages them to keep moving forward and to creating more awesome work like the stuff we're seeing today. Let's move on to more. There are more questions in the chat. Do you want to take the next one, Lynn?
Yeah. Thank you so much for all these questions. We have so many thoughtful questions today. There's a question. Have you considered collaborations across the African continent? Big question.
Yeah, I mean, although it's a thing where the community so far, which we have, is very much small, and that is why I see a need to kind of educate more people, so, you know, the community grows. And if the community grows, it means more African funds, it means more collaboration, and I think that's really key because one thing that can actually um, stunt the growth of having to have more African type faces is the fact that, it's only a few people doing it. And, it can be discouraging given that, oh, everyone has things to do and you know how long it takes to release a typeface, you know. So I feel like what we need is type design education for most parts where more people are getting to type design, and then we can now start talking about more collaborations, it becomes so easy, yeah, than having a few people like take on the whole responsibility. Yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah, and I think this is where also like again like we keep talking about the idea of like, helping everyone out and like contributing where I can. And I think this is where like if you already have like type design like education or knowledge that you can like share, like I think it always helps out. For those like who like lack access or like, just maybe even want like a friend to kind of like you know, pers- keeping each other accountable for making things or keeping that passion going, I think like means a lot in like a small community like ours, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, our next question is, what would be your stance on decolonizing Latin script? As much as we can be in a position ourselves where we can add more commonly known indigenous scripts like AdLim to Latin extended sets, how do you think that Africans can start to actually design scripts that support their own local languages within their own communities?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the colonization of Latin script is a process. It's going to be a long journey, because again, I say like 90% of colonization really did a heavy one on us, because we're like, oh, everyone speaks English, 90%, and even the minority scripts are just a few, and it's now the question of like, how do you like go from where you are to a point where, oh, you're independent of the ABC. But I feel like it's possible, but it's a process, and it would need everyone, to be involved per se. I think, or I believe that for most part, it's just important that we begin from where the points we are, and then we can move maybe backwards or forward in the right direction where we can now decolonize, but I feel also everything kind of works in line, and that's where everyone has a role to play, because right now there are people who are designing, the Africans who are designing for all those scripts who are, minority, underrepresented, there are also people who are just creating fonts that feel African, and that's why I spoke about different pathways to it. There's no one way towards this. If you feel decolonization is what you should do, by all means, go for it. If you feel like, oh, you just need to have more at this point in time, let's represent or let's have African languages represented in the Eurocentric or the Western kind of fonts we have, go for it. If it's like, oh, let's have a African feel to how fonts are made, so just pick your struggle and go with the flow.
Great answer. Decolonization is such a big topic, and there is no like one way. This is how you do it. It's a process. Everyone takes a little bit. a little bit of the whole thing, and we all together, try to move things forward and make it better and more accessible to people. So thank you. Thank you, Chisa. That's a great answer. The next question is also very interesting, kind of related to it. So the question is, we as African have been exposed to Western aesthetic. If we develop typefaces based on our own experiences, can signify that we just replicate where we might fight against in order to contribute to enrich our culture. How can we face this reality?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Yeah, so I think the question is, if I'm paraphrasing, it feels like we were exposed to this particular aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
If we try to fight against it in order to contribute, we might end up replicating it.
Okay.
How can
Yeah, okay.
how can we face that difficulty?
I don't think having to create for African typography it's a war. I don't see it as a war. I just feel like we are trying to, be in the conversation of like we need proper representation basically, and I don't see it as, oh, you need to like fight back or take, yes, there's a reclamation of some sort where we kind of, because again, we can have a conversation of like, oh, colonization, and that's all like the beginning of everything basically. And it's also the question of like, okay, in this present time and age, how can you still be relevant? Yes, you've been exposed to certain influences, how can you create your own? How can you not lose what was culture to you, so it's now that way of rediscovering what you've kind of lost, and again, it's going to be quite a journey, but it's also possible. So for one, you're not just like trying to do away with what you've been exposed to. You're trying to take what you've been exposed to and kind of make it your own, that is so you don't lose like cultural relevance per se,
Yeah, that's also a great answer. Figuring out your voice, I think there's a comment also in the chat that aims to clarify that question. So again, trying to interpret the question. So if I got the question wrong, by all means, please let me know. So the person who's clarifying this in the chat is saying that there's almost no reference point for original African type. That's kind of like the heart of the question. So if there's no reference point, how do we start designing, or how do we confront that? I guess that.
Which is very true. But I feel like we can create references. I mean, the sad reality is like there's no proper documentation of like what typefaces or what writing used to be before colonization. But I feel like we can also reshape history, by what we do basically. And I feel like, I mean, we're creating typefaces right now. In years to come, it would be references to those who would do better or do way more than we did. So there's no point where we can say, oh, okay, we don't have reference, then we can't move forward. That's how I feel though.
Yeah, and I guess like sort of thinking back to your lecture, I can think about like your reference of like you made a physical object that had certain, graphic visual qualities, and you were taking inspiration from that to bring it into a typeface. So like, yes, of course, the form started as like, like with like a Latin script like identity, but then like you brought in something that you made and like took elements from it and sort of inserted that into the design, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and I think that's the beautiful thing is that, when it comes to references, we could get them from around us, There's still a lot of cultural things which we can reference to, because if we're going to be honest, back then they also referenced something which they were very accustomed to. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then the next two questions from Gabriel, I think we can merge them into two because they're related. What makes a typeface distinctly African beyond patterns and symbols? And how do we balance tradition and being modern in African design forms?
Okay. The first is what makes a typeface distinctly. Ooh. Apologies. All right. What makes a typeface distinctly African, right?
Yeah, beyond patterns and symbols.
Yeah, I think it's the experience. I think it's the reference. Yeah, that's the best answer I have for it. Like the reference one, the experience. I would say the cultural relevance. I would say what it solves, and who it caters for. Like all that combination kind of like makes it distinctly African. So yeah, that's the best I can think of. The second, sorry, I didn't get a second.
The second is like, how do we balance tradition and modernity in African design forms?
Yeah, so I think the center point is what we're inspired by, and how we can try to fit whatever cultural reference we have into, today's world. You consider, okay, the kind of typeface we have, and how we can, and I always kind of see type design, African type design, as a kind of uh, um like a I can't really place the right word, but it's like a deviation for what is normal. So, and anytime I kind of approach African type design, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is how it is created, but is there a possibility where we can create, in a different manner that kind of doesn't conform? And if it doesn't conform but still works, perhaps that is how African typography should be. It shouldn't always be like metrics, like, oh, it has to be, how the ascendant has to be this way, or the X height has to be this amount. It could be like, how it's more of how can you push it, that it still feels relevant, and still doesn't lose its essence, doesn't lose that cultural feel, doesn't like, it still works in this age and time. So I feel like it's that is more of like a discovery for everyone. If you get into type, then kind of discover it. It's like, yeah, it's journey per se. Yeah, that's what I feel it is. And it's going to always be different for everyone. I mean, the way I design type wouldn't be the way the next African person would design type, but there's no wrong way at the end.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I totally agree with that. We have well, I think we're almost done over time. Thank you all for your questions. I do have one question I've been thinking about based on your presentation, and I guess you shared a lot of the pathways that you've taken and the things that you think could be in the future of African type and typography. And I guess my question is more about like where do you see like the biggest gaps right now, and in terms of both like maybe education and resources, and then how can designers that are both maybe local but also outside, people watching from all over, how can they support like equity and access, without trying to like impose, right? Without being authoritarian, like how. So the two part again is like, what do you see are the biggest gaps and what's needed, and then how can we support?
Yeah. That's a nice question because, like I said, the big issue we have is how inaccessible this resources to learning type is, you know, and how much, as much as there are platforms, obviously like Type Elective, trying to do that work, it's still little, and truly, if we want to have an inclusive world of typography that involves or that caters for everyone, it's important to kind of meet um, people at their points, also like bringing up people who would design for their own languages, and I think for one, there is a need for support, you know, and it's just that, like if you see that there's a need for this, and again, I do not expect people because the work is a lot, having to create create a font and you start having to cater for languages you don't even have a clue of, you know. And I feel like that could be discouraging, but then again, if there exist people who can do that work, everything becomes much easier, and so that's for one, that's a very important need that, we can support um Africans, and let them get into type design. And then they can also shape, the future of type through the works they do. So it's very important to leverage on support. It's also important that we amplify our voices to, speak on the representation and the type and design industry, and also like, underrepresented fonts or minority scripts. It's important we speak up on that. It's also important that we can collaborate. For most cases, you kind of hear conversations of like, oh, we can't, or we don't know of any African type designer, and that is why we're doing this. But I feel like at this point, there are a lot of African type designers, who you can actually work with, so you get it right, because again, I feel like typography is culture. It's not just like, communications. For Africans, it's a huge part of culture, and so we need to do it right.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to plug before we wrap up? Anything upcoming for you?
Yeah, I guess I would say I'm open. I'm always open to helping Africans get into type design. Feel free to reach out. I'm having a certain workshop sometime this month. But if you are a type enthusiastic, you um you want to get into type, or you're just curious on how things are being done, you can always reach out and I'll be willing to help.
Awesome. I put the link to your upcoming class on the chat. Hopefully folks will check it out, spread the word, and yeah, I'm really excited for you to like teach and share what you know, and especially your vision for African typography.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, thank you so much for being so like generous and open with your process and your thoughts, and just being so knowledgeable and humble in general. I think it like inspires us all. And yeah, like what are channels that people should follow you on to support you as you go through, like your mission and your journey? What are the best places people can keep in touch and, support you?
Yeah, I live on Twitter, I live on Instagram, Joboson Chisa. Also my Foundry, you can follow my Foundry, to get updates on new releases of typefaces, Ụdị Foundry, and for the platform I'm building to help educate Africans on type design, that's Type Africa. Yeah, no underscores in any of them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chisa. Thank you, Lynn. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll upload the recording when it's ready, so sometime during the weekend or early next week. Subscribe to our newsletter where we'll be sharing the recording as well. And by all means, please support Chisa's work. Follow him on Instagram, license our typefaces. And if you use it, I guess put it online, send us a screenshot. It's always great to see awesome type being used. Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great morning, great afternoon, great evening. And thanks again, Chisa, for being here and being so kind and generous with your work. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.